Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching from. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Dan DiFrancesco, Deputy Executive Editor here at Business Insider. So just moments ago, Venezuela President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, appeared in federal court in Lower Manhattan, actually just right around the corner here. And both parties pleaded not guilty to charges of drug trafficking and other crimes. So this is the latest development in a story that has captivated the international community, and it started with the U.S.'s covert operation on Saturday morning to capture Maduro and his wife. Maduro's arrest and what this means for Venezuela's future has implications across the business world. So we're going to explore what comes next, from securing a conviction against Maduro to the U.S. military's role in Venezuela to how markets, specifically the oil industry, will continue to react to the ongoing situation. So first, I want to turn to our senior editor, Kaja Whitehouse, who oversees our legal coverage here at Business Insider. Kaja, thanks so much for joining me.
Yay. Hi.
Yeah. Hi. So let's start with the fact that what happened moments ago, right? Maduro was arrested or was brought to court. He pled not guilty. He said, "I am innocent. I am not guilty. I am a decent president of my country." What happens next now?
Yeah. Well, let me just circle back to the court appearance
Sure.
for a second, if you don't mind. It was very interesting because usually these arraignments are very procedural, and you go up and the judge reads the charges and makes sure you know your rights and then says, how do you plead? And you always plead not guilty, even if you're planning to plead guilty at a later date. And in this case, he used it as a platform to declare, to publicly proclaim his innocence, and so did his wife. So this is clearly already turning out to be we already knew this, right? But that's just the latest sort of chess move in this political game.
A politician always finds a mic, they're going to say something. So let's start with the charges.
Yeah.
How hard will they be to prove? How long of a process are we in for here?
Okay. So the first thing I want to make clear is that I know that there's a lot of controversy around this case in general, right? And I think we need to break it down into different buckets. There are the charges, there's the case against him, and that's probably the least controversial thing right now, right? So he's basically the Venezuela and high-ranking officials have been in the DEA's crosshairs going back administrations, going back years, and they've been trying to bring cases against various people for many years, and in 2020 was when Maduro was first indicted, and nobody really batted an eye. It's like, okay, these guys are accused of the drug trafficking, blah, 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 blah. There are two high-ranking officials who've already pleaded guilty, so none of that has really sparked any interest or attention or international controversy until the raid, right? So we have the raid, and that is what people are concerned about.
Right. Yeah, so let's unpack that a little bit, because as you say, the charges aren't the surprising. It's the fact that he was taken from Venezuela without kind of extradition or all that. So there's implications on the international front, there's implications on the U.S. front, the fact that President Trump did not notify Congress ahead of time. What are the kind of the two prevailing arguments here? Yeah.
So I guess it sounds like there's different things, right? There's the charges, which are pretty run of the mill.
Sure.
Then there's the invasion, and I guess there's two components there, right? The two components of the invasion and the attack are, should the president have notified Congress, right? And second, even if they notified Congress, should they have done it at all because of international laws protecting sovereign states? And he was the sitting leader, right? So in both those cases, there are exceptions. Every rule, every law has an exception,
Sure.
right? And there are, you can say this is the rule, and then the U.S. government, Trump administration, is going to argue an exception. So when it comes to notifying Congress, the exception is that there tends to be pretty broad-based exception for short-term strikes, right? So you don't necessarily need to tell Congress if it's going to be something really fast and quick, and they, similar with what they did when they took out Osama bin Laden, right? So they're going to make that argument. Well, we didn't really need to tell you. And then when it comes to international law, there can be an exception made for self-defense, terrorism. And of course, what happened last year gearing up for this, right? They've been planning this for 9 months. In the last 9 months, they've labeled the Cartel de las Soles, which is the organization, as a terrorist organization.
Right.
So that's the argument there.
Right.
Who's right and wrong? Look, that's above my pay grade, but those are the arguments.
Yeah. What's the timeline as far as how is this something that's going to sort itself out in a couple months, a year, a couple years? Like, what's your sense of how long this could go on for?
I think years.
Okay.
Most of these, this is a complicated case. Usually it takes years. There could be a situation where maybe Nicolas Maduro says, asks for his right to a speedy trial, and they have to expedite it. And he could do that, right? Like, he's politically savvy. I could see all kinds of reasons why he might do that, to be like, show me your evidence. What do you actually have against me, right?
Yeah.
And let's go to trial right now. But if he doesn't do that, and he actually wants to make a case and really be prepared to defend himself, it will probably take years.
And in the meantime, he's being held in a kind of infamous Brooklyn prison, right? That
Yes.
some people will know, people that are there right now.
Yeah, so right now at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, it sort of overlooks the Gowanus Bay, although I imagine there's not a very good view, but I have no idea. So alongside him is Luigi Mangione, who's accused of killing the United Healthcare CEO, but it's been a detention for probably anybody you might think of who's come through.
Diddy, right? Sam
Yeah,
Bankman-Fried.
Sam Bankman-Fried, Ghislaine Maxwell, just
Who's who?
yeah, who's who of all kinds of people who've been arrested or have to face trial in Manhattan or Brooklyn Federal Court.
Yeah. Well, Kaja, thank you so much for joining us and giving us the rundown on the legal perspective. Now I want to welcome defense correspondent Jake Epstein joining us from London. So, Jake, thanks so much for taking the time today.
Hey, Dan, thanks for having me here.
Yeah, so I know that there's a lot of more questions than answers, but can we start maybe with how long of a presence our military will have in Venezuela? Let's start there. Obviously, based off of what happened on Saturday and now to today, what's the extent we're going to see?
Yeah, so it's pretty unclear, obviously, how long the U.S. plans to maintain its rather significant force presence in the Caribbean. A possibility, as Trump has indicated multiple times, is that there could be follow-on strikes against Venezuela. Just yesterday he said, quote, if they don't behave, we will do a second strike. And a lot of that, depends on the relationship between the Trump administration and Venezuela's interim president. There's also the possibility that the U.S. military could get involved in some of the neighboring countries. On Sunday, Trump, shared thoughts on Colombia, Cuba, and Mexico. He and other administration officials have repeatedly issued warnings to various Latin American leaders and criminal organizations. Clearly, there's more of an appetite to use military force in America's backyard than there has been in a while.
Yeah,
and the first indication of this was really the deadly boat strikes that we've seen over the past couple months.
Right. Yeah, I know that's been going on for a couple months now, and I think even today there was mention of Colombia. I guess that's a good kind of transition to talk about. Saturday's events surprised a lot of people in the international community, but there was a significant buildup in this region, right? This didn't just happen out of nowhere.
Yeah, exactly. So in the months leading up to the operation, the U.S. had gathered a massive, massive military presence in the Caribbean, the largest deployment that we've seen there in decades. We're talking an aircraft carrier strike group with dozens of embarked fighter jets, a collection of destroyers and cruisers. Each of those can carry Tomahawk cruise missiles. And then in addition to those forces, we had the U.S. deploy aircraft to various bases in the region. Altogether, there were some 15,000 troops there as of last month. So the force buildup, indicated that an attack was likely, but the sort of snatch and grab mission on Saturday really did come as a surprise. The focus had really been on sort of these larger military assets in the region, the destroyers, the carrier, not necessarily the special operators that ultimately rushed in and apprehended Maduro.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about those. I think it was the Delta Force, I believe, that was the group that executed the mission. So can you put it a little in context for us? how big, how difficult of a mission is this to kind of go in and get a country's president and then get out with? I believe there was no servicemen or women that were we lost or equipment.
Yeah, so the operation was massive. I mean, we're talking more than 150 aircraft participated. They launched from 20 different bases, land and sea. These are F-22, F-35 stealth fighter jets, airborne early warning planes, B-1 bombers, drones, helicopters. It reminded me a little bit of Operation Midnight Hammer when the U.S. bombed Iran's nuclear facilities in June. That similarly involved dozens of different types of aircraft, sort of paving the way for a critical force at the center of the mission. The top U.S. general said over the weekend that the mission to apprehend and extract Maduro required months and months of meticulous planning and rehearsal. You had U.S. intelligence agencies spending a while, mapping out and trying to understand Maduro's patterns of life. And the U.S. even built a replica of his compound, which is a tactic that we saw ahead of the 2011 Osama bin Laden raid.
Right.
So like Midnight Hammer, the key was maintaining the element of surprise, though.
Right. Now, the main goal, it seems, was to capture Maduro and his wife, but we saw satellite images. There was damage to some of Venezuela's military complex. How does that figure into this overall plan of what the mission was?
Yeah, so most of the aircraft involved in the operation cleared the way for helicopters that were carrying the extraction teams. They flew low over Caracas and apprehended Maduro. The aircraft effectively targeted Venezuela's military installations and air defenses, clearing a path for the helicopters. In football terms, you can think about this as blocking for a running back, let's say. And satellite images have shown pretty extensive damage at one of Venezuela's major military installations, which hosts defense ministries and commands. It's worth noting, of course, that the U.S. strikes also hit other facilities like port and airport infrastructure. Ultimately, the helicopters carried the forces that went on to storm Maduro's compound. They apprehended him and his wife. They took him to a Navy ship, the amphibious assault ship USS Iwo Jima, and from there they were transferred to New York, where they are today, where he has been indicted. And as we've heard, that process is just now getting started.
Yep. Yeah. So before I let you go, what else are you watching? You mentioned there's some, call it threats, talk about neighboring countries. There's also questions about, people have speculated about China's reaction to all of this because of the interest it has in Venezuela's oil industry. I guess, what are you kind of keeping your eye on from the military side of things as far as what comes next?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's so many more questions than answers right now. We know that Trump wants the U.S. to become more involved in Venezuela's oil industry. But does that mean American troops have to go into Venezuela and guard oil fields and infrastructure? That's where things could get pretty risky for American personnel. So we'll see there. And then, as you mentioned, there's the China element. Beijing has a lot at stake with regards to Venezuela's oil industry. China has already pretty strongly condemned the operation. And another element that we're watching is, as sort of Western countries and American allies react to what happened over the weekend, depending on where they stand and how strong their response is, this could embolden China or Russia to make similar moves in the years down the line.
Yeah. Well, Jake, we appreciate you taking the time. I know there's a lot that's up in the air, but glad we have you on our side to help us kind of digest and understand all of it. So thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So finally, let's get the market's perspective, right? And we're going to bring in executive editor Joe Cioli, who's based in Chicago. Joe, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so right off the top, what's the market reaction to Saturday's events and kind of the aftermath?
Yeah, well, I'll start with stocks. The stock market is absolutely loving the situation. We have the Dow at record highs. The leading stock in the Dow is actually an energy company, an oil driller, Chevron. Not so coincidentally, it was the only remaining U.S. driller to still have a presence in Venezuela. And given what President Trump said about his desire for U.S.-based producers to, go into Venezuela, invest money, and revitalize the oil industry there, Chevron, I think, is being viewed by the market as like the big winner. So if the Venezuela raid is going to boost corporate earnings, which is what it seems like it might do for Chevron, then investors are going to like that, regardless of whether it's a good or bad geopolitical situation, they're voting with their wallets and on earnings, and that's what we're seeing today.
Right. Yeah, oil really is the big story here, but it's not as simple as, okay, now, Venezuela is going to flick a switch and oil is going to start pumping out and it's going to have a big effect. Because while they do sit on massive reserves, there's a lot of work that needs to be done here, right? There are big challenges for any of these companies, even ones that are already, even the one that's already established there, to start,
Right.
making money as the administration has said.
Yeah, the price of oil has been a little wonky since since it opened last night at about 6 p.m. Eastern time. It was down 2%. Now it's up 2%. And it seems like traders are still trying to wrap their head around like what this means in the long term, because as you mentioned, if there's going to be any new oil drilled in Venezuela, it's not going to happen this month, maybe even this year. It's going to be a long-term play, and it's going to require investment from outside parties to revitalize the infrastructure that had crumbled under Maduro and to get the spigot flowing a little bit. And then secondarily, the companies have to want to drill that oil. We're currently in a situation where oil prices are down 20% roughly since the start of last year, and the ROI on drilling, investing a ton of money, starting a whole new drilling initiative at a time when you're not really getting much bang for your buck for how much oil actually costs, it might be a hurdle that that companies are facing, and it's a bit of a catch-22. The more they produce, the more the price will theoretically go down. So it's the entire oil industry has been dealing with those lower prices for the last year or so, and this is just kind of another variable in that equation.
Right. Yeah, you bring up a good point too with the oversupply that's currently in the market and the work that needs to be put in. If you've ever watched Landman, you probably understand that this isn't simple. These are big gambles. And then there's also the other factor of what happens if and when a new administration comes in, what that means, how they view Venezuela. So to your point, because it's not happening overnight, it's a long bet you need to make that. There's a lot of question marks.
Mm-hmm.
Last thing on oil, I know President Trump has said that Venezuela stole U.S. oil. Can you maybe just fill us in a little bit on the backstory there?
Yeah, so he's referring to just the fact that Venezuela sits on a massive amount of oil. They have over 300 billion barrels worth in their stockpile, and then in terms of how that's translated to actual production, it's like less than 1% of the world's daily production. So it has like the biggest reserve, but it produces less than 1% on a daily basis. Well, what Trump's referring to there is just like the missed opportunity. And, in his mind, he thinks the U.S. should be going in there. U.S. companies should be taking the bull by the horns, taking advantage of the crude stockpiles there that need to be extracted from the ground and sold. And so that's what he means. He's just referring to the fact that like, despite its presence as a major oil player, it really hasn't been doing much of anything under Maduro.
Yeah, and I think there was, a U.S. presence at one point years ago before things kind of changed. But separate from the oil industry, while that's kind of still a TBD, there was one big winner, at least one big winner in the prediction market.
Mm-hmm.
What happened there?
Yeah. So a very well-timed bet was placed on Polymarket on Friday evening. Remember the seizure of Maduro happened Saturday a.m. at some point. So there was a position open. It was about $30,000 position that Maduro would be in U.S. custody, and by Saturday morning, that position had it had paid off. It was a $400,000 bet basically. So it's 30,000 to 400,000. The person more than 10x their money in a day. And you can go online and find any number of theories about who it was, whether it was someone close to the government. How close to the government are we talking? Is it someone affiliated with the government at all? There's tons of conspiracy theories, and there are no details about who this person is. Polymarkets is a famously opaque platform, but there is tons of good reading and speculation around it. But I'm not going to get into that personally. But yeah, someone really cleaned up, perhaps with some foreknowledge of what happened.
Wild story. I think if nothing else, what we know is that there will probably be more of these type of scenarios where something happens and somebody either gets incredibly lucky or uses some insider information, whatever the case may be. It's certainly issues like this or situations like this aren't going to go anywhere. Before I let you go, broadly speaking, the economy, right? What's the best case scenario for how this situation plays out and how it impacts the economy, and what are maybe a concern that you have?
Yeah, I mean, the best case scenario for the economy is that oil prices stay lower. I mean, one of the main things that's helped the U.S. in particular battle this persistently high inflation that it's experienced basically since COVID has been the fact that prices at the pump have come down along with the price of crude oil. I've noticed it. It's definitely way less than it was, even like a couple of years ago. So as it trickles down through many different layers, like what consumers are actually paying to fill their car will benefit as long as the price of oil is low. But I think what we need to remember is like none of this is happening in a vacuum. Like if things get a little too advanced in terms of like drilling in Venezuela and there's going to be more oil produced, we have this coalition of global oil leaders, OPEC plus, Saudi Arabia, assorted like global giants that could basically at the flip of a switch decide we're going to either suppress or release more oil to kind of manage the price. So they're a wild card, and who knows what they're going to do. They announced that they were going to keep going with their plan to not pump any new oil in the first quarter yesterday, but they were dealing with like 24 hours of information about Venezuela. Who knows how that will go as they get more information. But yeah, OPEC Plus is a real wild card as to whether your price at the pump is going to stay low.
Yeah, well, Joe, I appreciate you taking the time. Thanks so much for being here. Best of luck to your Bears in the playoffs, and until next time. So that's it for us here. We'll obviously continue to bring you the latest on BusinessInsider.com. If you're not already, please subscribe to my newsletter, Business Insider Today. Thanks so much for joining. Until next time.